The Half-Life series is filled with mysteries that, at this point, may never be solved. At the top of this list is the entity that follows the player across Black Mesa and a Combine-controlled Earth 20 years later. This entity, known by many outside of this world, possessed incredible power and appeared to be a man playing a giant game of chess with the characters as his pawns, always watching from a distance. Who or what was he? Who were his employers? What made him an enemy of the Combine? Was he good or bad? And what was his ultimate plan? Here, we explore Half-Life's biggest mystery through the lore, story, and theories behind the GMan. The border world of Xen offered incredible power, connection, and sanctuary to whoever or whatever controlled it, shifting across realities and dimensions. Xen connected to many worlds, becoming home to creatures like barnacles, the Nylanth, the Vortigaunt, and Houndai. Nothing was native to Xen. It picked up life as new worlds connected to it. As one of these, the Nylanth, a being of incredible power, found sanctuary and dominance in Xen after its species was wiped out by the Combine, a union of nightmares. Back on Earth, around the 1960s or 70s, the Black Mesa research facility discovered Xen through teleportation experiments. Survey teams were sent to explore, document, and bring back samples, despite the dangers. The crystals they found here were composed of both normal and exotic matter, the latter consisting of antimass. To study these, Dr. Rosenberg designed the anti-mass spectrometer, which was constructed in Sector C for the anomalous materials team to use. During this period, the extent of the GMan and his employer's influence over Black Mesa's discovery of Xen remains unknown. He was part of a secret interdimensional organization that worked in the shadows. At the top were the employers. Below them, the agents. This is the position the GMan held, and below them, the soldiers hired to complete tasks. These soldiers, stored in stasis outside of space-time after they were hired, were unaware that they were pawns in a larger game. Their contracts sold to the highest bidder for their services. What the currency or goals were remain mostly unknown, yet as the story continued, several of these goals and hired agents were revealed, showcasing the GMan and his employer's ability to manipulate humanity, space, and time. As certain events had to occur to complete their contracts, agents such as the GMan watched from a distance to intervene if necessary if deviations from a plan happened. Essentially, he was a glorified babysitter. The actions of the GMan are pretty much unknown before around May of a year in the early 2000s. After this point, his appearances became more prominent and direct as his mysterious employers had a goal in mind. They wanted control of the border world of Xen, a goal that would change everything. With power over time, they saw a timeline in which they could make this possible. They just had to nudge certain people to make this a reality. The GMan got his name from his appearance as a regular GMan. He was secret, authoritative, and wore a suit. He appeared to be a member of the United States government with a high security clearance. He was known to and had some sway over Dr. Wallace Breen, the administrator of Black Mesa. Regardless of how he obtained this position, he used the power to his advantage. His briefcase contained an identity card, a handgun, pencils, and a sheet of paper. He appeared to be human with a high level of control or something that mimicked the appearance of a human. This is something that will be explored later. To secure control over Xen, The Nilanth had to be taken out. In order to do this, several things had to be set in motion. On May the 3rd, the GMan travelled to the Santiago military base. From reports of some of the Marines there, they believed he was from a secret branch of the government in search of recruits. To those in charge, he requested a team trained in indoor strategic combat for a mission at the Black Mesa research facility. A few days later, on May 7th, he returned to the base and appeared to focus his attention mostly on one of the recruits, Corporal Adrian Shepard. To Shepard, he looked more like a lawyer or insurance agent. On May the 9th, the Marines were told that they would spend the next week training at the combat simulation facility for a mission, and from rumors, they heard the name Black Mesa. With the Hazardous Environment Combat Unit in training, on around May 11th, a Xenian crystal sample, GG-3883, was delivered to Black Mesa. According to Dr. Rosenberg and Dr. Keller, it was delivered under mysterious circumstances. It has not been confirmed who this was delivered by, but it is believed it was brought in by the GMan. Dr. Colette Green later evaluated this sample and discovered that it was the purest and largest sample they had acquired so far from Xen. Because of this, the Office of the Administrator ordered that it replace sample EP0021 in an upcoming experiment. The Office of the Administrator also ordered that to study the sample properly, because of its size and purity, they would have to violate the normal anomalous materials handling protocol and adjust the safety parameters of the anti-mass spectrometer. This order put stress on the team as they attempted to prepare for their test in time. As May 15th arrived, it was confirmed to the HECU that their upcoming mission would take place at the Black Mesa research facility. They just had to wait for it to happen, whatever it was. Corporal Adrian Shepard would also be on this team. With the crystal sample GG-3883 in place to be tested, the HECU prepared to be sent out for an event, and an even more secret team, the Black Ops, were on standby for another secret mission. Over in Xen, the Nilanth appeared to also be aware of something on the horizon. This creature had escaped the torture of the Combine and sought out a new home to hide from them. It was also aware of the GMan, that he was not a man at all but something else. It was aware of the human survey teams that had travelled to Xen and waited for an opportunity to send through its slave army of Vortigaunt to claim Earth for itself. There were also other factors at play. Dr. Gordon Freeman was scheduled to deliver the crystal sample into the beam of the anti-mass spectrometer. This was essential to their plan. Race X would discover Earth through Xen and various other smaller factors that may or may not have also been manipulated through the efforts of this secret interdimensional organization. The GMan and his employers had put everything in place they needed to claim Xen. They just had to make sure everything played out as they planned. A regular experiment in Sector C of Black Mesa was normally stressful, yet with a sample of a much larger size and purity, the anomalous materials team were under significantly more pressure. The administrator wanted conclusive results for this sample, and to achieve this, they had adapted the safety parameters and decided to boost the anti-mass spectrometer's power to 105%. It was a gamble, but they needed the extra resolution. This gamble, they feared, could trigger a resonance cascade, but that only had a small chance of occurring. Several scientists were completely against these adjustments but were forced to proceed. As the GMan arrived on site, he observed as blackouts knocked out entire regions of Black Mesa as a result of the additional power requirements. On his tram ride in, he took note of Dr. Gordon Freeman, someone who would be invaluable to the plan ahead. As he arrived in Sector C, he had a heated discussion with one of the scientists. While it is unknown what this argument was actually about, as it was muffled to anyone outside of the room, it is believed that it was related to the increased power usage of the anti-mass spectrometer. Increasing it from 90% to 105% was a risky move. Despite the complaints of the team, the experiment moved ahead. Freeman entered the test chamber, activated the anti-mass spectrometer, and waited for the crystal sample to arrive. Meanwhile, the G-Man approached a very cautious Dr. Eli Vance and warned him to prepare for unforeseen consequences. Eli had thought about stopping the experiment, but even in this moment, he chose to follow the orders of the administrator anyway. As foreseen, the G-Man watched as Dr. Gordon Freeman pushed the crystal sample, GG-3883, into the beam of the anti-mass spectrometer, and it shattered. The exotic energy inside flooded the chamber with the energy the anomalous materials team had sought to analyze. This chain reaction triggered a resonance cascade that ripped open a tear in space between Earth and Xen. Just as planned by the G-Man and his employers, the Nilanth teleported its slave army of Vortigaunt through to Earth inside the Black Mesa facility to secure it as a new home, safe from the Combine. With Xen connected to Earth, the G-Man turned his attention to Dr. Gordon Freeman. The right man in the wrong place could make all the difference in the world, and this scientist would ensure their control over Xen. As Gordon began his journey across Black Mesa, the G-Man came across the daughter of Dr. Eli Vance, Alyx. Her mother had already died in this disaster as the Vortigaunt and creatures of Xen had fallen into the facility. As he looked at her, he saw something special. His employers told him that she was just a mere child of no practical use to anyone, but he thought differently. The G-Man ignored the worries of his employers and plucked her out of Black Mesa to safety. Over the following hours, the personnel of Black Mesa were massacred by headcrabs, bull squid, barnacles, Vortigaunt, and the other hostile lifeforms of Xen. Meanwhile, Gordon Freeman discovered that he was a natural with a crowbar and the various other weaponry he found on his journey through Black Mesa. All he wanted to do was reach the surface to call for help. With Gordon on track, the G-Man's second plan came into play. The HECU were alerted that it had happened and they were dispatched to Black Mesa. Unfortunately, the Osprey holding Adrian was shot down, and when he awoke, he was completely unaware of what his orders actually were, as they were planned to have been given to him upon his arrival. The HECU were ordered to clean up the experiment that had gone wrong at Black Mesa. This meant they had to kill every alien lifeform and any witness with knowledge of what had happened there. As the G-Man was behind the arrival of this team, it could be suggested that he and his employers had planned the Black Mesa incident to be a self-contained event. Yet, as the hours passed, the situation deteriorated rapidly. If anything, maybe there were consequences that even the G-Man and his employers had not foreseen. From a distance, the G-Man watched Gordon and Adrian closely. Gordon grew more confident and survived several events. He ran, he thought, he shot, and he lived through scenarios that had killed many of his co-workers. Even after the arrival of the HECU, Gordon took them out one by one. As for Adrian, he showed the ability to adapt and survive against all odds, traits that reminded the G-Man of himself. As a result of the continued arrival of Xenian reinforcements and Freeman's killing spree, the HECU decided to pull out and save whoever they could. Having heard the call, Adrian raced to the evacuation point. However, Adrian still had a role to play as a pawn in the plan of the G-Man and his employers. So, the G-Man closed the hangar door that led to the Osprey, and he was left behind. As each minute passed, the Xenian forces overwhelmed and dominated the hallways of Black Mesa. Gordon was eventually told that something on Xen held open the tear between their world and the border world. Having survived deadly scenarios and against the odds, he was sent through to Xen to take it out. In a baptism of fire, a simple scientist had been forged into a soldier under the watchful eye and guidance from afar of the GMan. With Gordon on Xen as planned, the GMan once again turned his attention to Corporal Adrian Shepard. He and the few survivors of the HECU had come across the Black Ops, a safety net sent in to rid Black Mesa of all alien life and human survivors. Adrian also discovered the thermonuclear device they had brought with them to do this. To give himself and the other survivors a chance to escape, he disarmed the device. However, shortly after, the GMan reactivated it. Each stage of his incident appeared to have been meticulously planned, and these little deviations were fixed quickly. Adrian later killed the Gene Worm, one of the most important members of the Race X species, a goal he had been guided towards since the GMan had spotted him that day at the Santiago military base. Upon its death, a portal storm pulled Adrian into somewhere new. The GMan looked down at his recruit in what appeared to be an osprey flying through the New Mexico desert. In the distance, the thermonuclear device exploded and eradicated all life in Black Mesa. A successful cleanse of those who had any idea of what had happened. The osprey then brought him to his new home, Stasis. Throughout this incident, the GMan had teleported all across Black Mesa to ensure that specific actions occurred at the right time and that there was no deviation from the plan. Nevertheless, he still had two loose ends to tie up after the destruction of Black Mesa. He told the corporal that he admired his ability to adapt and survive against all odds. His employers, on the other hand, did not trust that Adrian would keep everything he had seen to himself, one of those human temptations they had observed. So, the GMan had offered them an alternative, to preserve Adrian in stasis as an agent for a mission in the future. There, he could be stored safely so that he could cause no harm and no harm could come to him. A choice that had been made for Adrian. In doing so, the GMan had hired a new recruit against his will, whose services could be sold off. With Adrian dealt with, the GMan had one more loose end: Freeman. Over in Xen, the Nilanth understood what had happened and how its loss of control over Xen had been manufactured by something that was not a man. The creature also knew that this entity waited for Gordon. Regardless, the Nilanth put up a fight against the scientist, but it was not enough. The death of the Nilanth triggered many events. Gordon was pulled from danger by the GMan. The entity removed Gordon's weapons as he claimed they were government property. He told Freeman that because of his actions, the border world of Xen was under his and his employer's control. The plan had worked and they had got what they wanted. His employers were also impressed by Gordon Freeman's actions during this incident and wanted to offer him a job. The specifications of this job were not explained, and Gordon actually did not have a choice. He either stepped into a portal created by the GMan, or he was offered a battle he had no chance of winning. Gordon would be an incredibly valuable asset in the future. With this Hobson's choice, Gordon entered the portal, and he too, just like Adrian, was stored in stasis for future use. For the most part, the taking of Xen was successful. Not only had the GMan and his employers acquired access to a border world with connections to so many worlds, but they had also hired two strong assets, Dr. Gordon Freeman and Corporal Adrian Shepard. The Black Mesa incident was a perfectly orchestrated moment in human history. But for the GMan, it was a worthy sacrifice for the control of Xen. But why did he send Gordon to fight while having control over space and time? Well, the Nylanth and the Vortigaunt had control over an energy source called the Vortessence. The Vortigaunt, as slaves of the Nylanth, were able to use the power to limit or even completely remove his abilities. On one occasion in the future, this green energy was used to hold the GMan in place without access to any of his powers. So it made sense why they sent Freeman. It appeared that the GMan and his employers had done everything in their power to limit the aftermath and even the knowledge of this incident, which begs the question, was the arrival of the Combine on Earth an unforeseen consequence of the acquisition of Xen? The Resonance Cascade had alerted the Combine Empire of the existence of planet Earth. Just as they had done to so many other planets, they attacked and conquered it with their vast army. Over the next 20 years, humanity was subjected to some of the worst treatment imaginable as the Combine harvested what they needed from the planets. As for the GMan and his employers over this period, their actions are unknown. Why they wanted Xen and for what reason has never been revealed. However, after 2 decades away from his planet, the employers had a new task for Gordon. As stated, the placement of Gordon could have been something the employers wanted to happen, or his services could have been paid for in a contract. Regardless, the GMan entered stasis to put Gordon Freeman in place for a new mission.
Rise and shine, Mr. Freeman. Rise and shine. Not that I wish to imply you have been sleeping on the job. No one is more deserving of a rest, and all the effort in the world would have gone to waste until... well, let's just say your hour has come again. The right man in the wrong place can make all the difference in the world. So wake up, Mr. Freeman. Wake up and smell the ashes.
Having placed Gordon on a train 20 years after the Black Mesa incident, once again, he watched from the sidelines to make sure his soldier followed the correct path. The Combine's occupation of Earth was likely an unintended side effect of their acquisition of Xen, and at this moment in human history, the Resistance had grown just enough to finally fight back against the Combine. Gordon would be the match to trigger the powder keg that was an uprising. As he had done with the Black Mesa incident, the GMan watched Gordon from afar and monitored his progress. From the City 17 train station to a fallen Resistance base to a broadcast screen, the GMan observed Gordon as he caught the attention of the Combine, traversed the Underground Railroad. The entity intervened at New Little Odessa, very likely to alert Colonel Odessa Cubbage of a Combine raid on the way so that Gordon would be prepared for the assault. He observed as Freeman survived the raid of Black Mesa East and helped in the fall of Nova Prospekt. As Gordon and an adult Alyx had been inside during the explosion, and as they were not heard from for weeks after, Gordon, the hero of Black Mesa, became a martyr, the symbol of this revolution, the spark that the Resistance truly needed to trigger an uprising. Alyx had also been a very valuable companion to Gordon and member of the Resistance. It appeared that the GMan's interference in her fate had ultimately helped this mission. Yet, Gordon and Alyx had not fallen with Nova Prospekt. They had instead entered a slow time warp after attempting to use the unstable teleporter in the prison. They arrived in Dr. Kleiner's lab 2 weeks later, just in time to see how the Resistance had finally decided to fight back against their oppressors. Shortly after, with Gordon on track, the G-Man watched as he arrived at the top of the Citadel. His actions here led to the destabilization of the dark fusion reactor that powered the Citadel, an action that led Dr. Wallace Breen to fall to his death, and the Combine to lose contact with Earth. Every Citadel across the planet shut down because of this. This may have been what the G-Man and his employers had brought Gordon here to do. Having completed his mission, the entity paused time just as an explosion threatened to take Gordon and Alyx's life.
Time, Dr. Freeman? Is it really that time again? It seems as if you only just arrived. You've done a great deal in a small time span. You've done so well, in fact, that I've received some interesting offers for your services. Ordinarily, I wouldn't contemplate them, but these are extraordinary times. Rather than offer you the illusion of free choice, I will take the liberty of choosing for you, if and when your time comes round again. I do apologize for what must seem to you an arbitrary imposition, Dr. Freeman. I trust it will all make sense to you in the course of... well, I'm really not at liberty to say. In the meantime, this is where I get off.
What was interesting about this moment, other than the fact that the G-Man had placed Gordon back in stasis after the mission to remove the Combine's access to Earth had been successful, was that he did not save Alyx this time. He had left her to her fate. It appears that she had served her purpose. As for the employment offers, it solidified that while Gordon believed he was in full control, he was not. He was simply a pawn of the G-Man. He had been pulled out of stasis to cripple the Combine's hold of Earth, and having done it, he was put back in storage. This is where the story of the G-Man and his employers becomes more interesting. Up until this point, they had maintained complete control over their assets and a clear plan of the timeline. They did not foresee the intrusion of the Vortigaunt. This species had an incredibly strong connection to the Vortessence, the power that appeared to be one of the few weaknesses of the G-Man. The Vortigaunt were also aware of him, or what he was. In their alliance with humanity against the Combine, they had formed a strong connection with the population of Earth, but they did not reveal all of their knowledge. The Vortigaunt saw Alyx and Gordon as important members of their fight against the Combine. They also had the ability to peer into the future through the Vortessence. When the Vortigaunt saw how the G-Man had once again abducted Gordon and left Alyx to a fate of certain death, they enhanced their power with antlion extract and then froze time themselves to save her. They also entered stasis, the G-Man's prison outside of space-time that he had stored his recruits. With guards stationed at the entrance, 2 of the Vort tracked down Gordon. In fear that his best asset could be stolen, the G-Man entered stasis.
We'll see about that.
This intrusion showed that the G-Man not only had a weakness, but he also felt anger, a human emotion. Something of his had been stolen and released into the timeline, someone that should not have been there. It is also unclear on whether Alyx's survival was foreseen by the G-Man. The release of Gordon meant that his actions would ultimately change or adapt whatever plan this shadowy organization had. The G-Man could also not contact or manipulate Gordon as the Vortigaunt watched over him. This was a huge problem. Over the following days, the Citadel collapsed, leveled City 17, and Alyx and Gordon escaped on a train. However, on their way to a secret resistance base outside of the city, Alyx was attacked by a Combine hunter who sought them out. Alyx and Gordon had stolen some valuable information from the Combine before its collapse, and they wanted it back. As the Vortigaunt came together to save Alyx, someone they believed to be incredibly important to a moment in the future, the G-Man appeared to Gordon in this rare, distracted moment.
Dr. Freeman, I realize this moment may not be the most convenient for a heart-to-heart, but I had to wait until your friends were otherwise occupied. There was a time they cared nothing for Miss Vance, when their only experience of humanity was a crowbar coming at them down a steel corridor. When I plucked her from Black Mesa, I acted in the face of objections that she was a mere child and of no practical use to anyone. I have learned to ignore such naysayers when quelling them was out of the question. Still, I am not one to squander my investments, and I remain confident she was worth far more than the initial appraisal. That's why I must now extract from you some small repayment owed for your own survival. See her safely to White Forest, Dr. Freeman. I wish I could do more than keep an eye on you, but I have agreed to abide by certain restrictions. Well, now, listen carefully, my dear. When you see your father, relay these words. Prepare for unforeseen consequences.
Having said his piece, he retreated back and began to watch again from a distance. Freeman and Alyx made their way towards White Forest, and on their way out of Victory Mine, the G-Man made his first stop at the highway outpost to make sure they were on track. This was not a part of the plan, but he and his employers had to work with the situation they had. Alyx was in possession of a data file that displayed the rough location of a missing research vessel, the Borealis. It had disappeared from its home deep underground in Aperture Science. This vessel had advanced technology on board, and when the Resistance discovered where it was, this would change everything. The warning to prepare for unforeseen consequences directed at Eli specifically was a very calculated move by the G-Man. He knew that Eli regretted his decision not to shut down the anti-mass spectrometer during the Black Mesa incident after he had heard these words once before. He knew that Eli might link this warning to the discovery of the Borealis. It would appear that the G-Man and his employers did not want the Resistance to seek this ship out. At least that is my interpretation. As expected, upon the arrival of Alyx and Gordon at White Forest, they learned of the Borealis stuck somewhere in the north, and Alyx blurted out the G-Man's message as if he had commanded her to in this moment, as the G-Man's face briefly appeared on the monitor. As expected, Eli had the reaction the G-Man wanted. As he watched, the Resistance fought off the Combine, and they even launched a rocket at a forming super portal. In doing this, the Combine was completely cut off from the planet. No backup plan. In a final moment of desperation, two Combine advisors crashed through into the hangar of a helicopter that Alyx and Gordon planned to use to rescue one of their fellow Resistance members. In this moment, Eli was brutally murdered by an advisor, and all of his memories and thoughts were absorbed by the creature before he was dropped to the ground. Murdered brutally in front of his daughter. The GMan watched this. None of this was meant to happen. Gordon's return had ultimately led to this. Alyx would not have retrieved the information in the Citadel, and Eli would still be alive. From the GMan's perspective, the interference of the Vortigaunt had led Gordon to be unable or unwilling to perform the tasks laid before him. As a result, actions had occurred that were unplanned. So, the GMan and his employers looked for someone new to help them. In order to rewrite moments that had not gone to plan, the GMan used his power and travelled back 5 years in this timeline. He foresaw how events would play out and knew how to test and hire a new recruit, a younger Alyx Vance. Just as he had with the Xen incident, the GMan prepared a series of events to see what Alyx could do. He allowed the Combine to briefly discover his location. As quickly as they could, they used Vortessen's energy to trap him inside of a prison. During a raid on a Combine facility, Dr. Eli Vance and his friend Russell entered a Combine system and discovered information about something called the Vault. But the system provided very limited details on what it actually was. As planned, Eli was captured by Combine forces, and the discovery of a Combine prison led Alyx to enter the Vault under the impression that Gordon Freeman, the hero of Black Mesa who had gone missing, was stored inside it. It was not until Alyx freed the entity that she realized he was not Gordon Freeman. He was something else.
Impressive work, Ms. Vance.
Gordon Freeman?
Gordon Freeman. Ms. Vance, you wouldn't need all that to imprison Gordon Freeman.
So, who are you?
Perhaps what I am is not as important as what I can offer you in exchange for coming all this way. Some believe the fate of our worlds is inflexible. My employers disagree. They authorize me to nudge things in a particular direction from time to time. What would you want nudged, Miss Vance?
The Combine off Earth. I want the Combine off Earth.
That would be a considerably large nudge. Too large, given the interests of my employers.
Well, you asked.
What if I could offer you something you don't know you want?
Dad? Dad? What? Is that me? What is this? What's happening?
We are in the future. This is the moment where you watch your father die. Unless...
What? Unless what?
Unless you were to take matters into your own hands. Release your father, Mizrats. Good. As a consequence of your action, this entity will continue, and this entity will not.
Right. So he's okay, right? He lives. My dad lives.
You are aware that you've proven yourself to be of extraordinary value. A previous hire has been unable or unwilling to perform the tasks laid before him. We have struggled to find a suitable replacement until now.
No! I just want to go home. Send me home!
I'm afraid you misunderstand the situation, Miss Vance.
Wait! Hey, wait! Wait! Wait!
In allowing Alyx to reach through space and time to kill the advisor, the GMan had quite possibly fixed an issue created by the Vortigaunt, the death of Eli. However, Alyx had once again been plucked by the GMan, this time as a new agent after Gordon Freeman had failed him. 5 years in the future, just after Alyx had been taken, Dr. Eli Vance knew exactly where his daughter had gone. He knew that the GMan and his unforeseen consequences must have had something to do with her disappearance. Eli, Gordon, and Alyx were just 3 of the GMan's pawns, a mutual friend or enemy of sorts who had ruined their lives. The GMan had a relationship of sorts with many people. Eli knew him to be the harbinger of disaster. Breen knew him as the person who controlled Gordon. Alyx knew him as the entity that had stopped the death of her father. The Combine also knew of him in some way, and that Vortessen's energy could stop him. And the Vortigaunt also knew of him and what he could do. Other pawns included Adrian, who still remains in stasis to this day. Even Barney Calhoun was watched by the shadowy group at some point. Every aspect of the Half-Life timeline was manipulated by the GMan and his employers for whatever goal they required. The Xen invasion triggered so much, and the placement of Gordon 20 years later allowed them to hit the Combine hard. But the interference of the Vortigaunt simply got in the way. I have done my best to pull together what I could about the GMan and his employers, but without Half-Life 2 Episode 3 or Half-Life 3, we will sadly probably never know what they actually are or what their aim is. There are, however, several fan theories that are very interesting. The theory that the GMan is a future Gordon Freeman is one that has floated around. G for Gordon and Man at the end of Freeman. A future self guiding a younger self to make sure that something happens. Not one I buy into really. I think the most straightforward theory is that the GMan is still a messenger of his employers, but his employers are Valve. The GMan set up everything for the game's events to occur. When Valve struggled to create a Half-Life 2 Episode 3 that they felt would not match the hype, they made Half-Life Alyx and had the GMan retcon one of the most impactful moments in gaming history. They rewrote the death of Eli Vance in-game, which allowed them to set up a new storyline or timeline for another game. The all-seeing Vortigaunt claimed that far distant eyes looked out through Gordon's, and that something secret steered them both, but they would not name it. We are the viewers through his eyes. The GMan, as the employee of Valve, set up the entire series for us to play through. What I can't figure out though is who the Vortigaunt would be in this theory. What do you think? The most interesting theory is that the GMan is a Shu'ulathoi. The original name of the Combine Advisor, the Breen Grub Twitter account written by Mark Laidlaw, is considered not canon, but I would personally like to believe that there is some truth to it. While there are a lot to the tweets, which I have covered in a previous video, it tells the story of the Shu'ulathoi, a species of dreamers who created whole worlds inside their shared telepathic mind. These were the Shu'ulathoi in their grub stage. When they hatched, they were cut off from their worlds and transformed into whatever they wished by thought. The Shu'ulathoi were also a species conquered by the Combine, and their grubs were harvested to create the Combine Advisors. However, some of these grubs managed to escape during the invasion. The theory is that the GMan and his employers are what these grubs turned into when they hatched, a creature with possibly psychic power that looks like a human, but something is just off. During her altercation with the GMan, Alyx had asked who he was, and he responded with what instead. The GMan mentions human temptations when he speaks to Adrian at the end of Opposing Force, something a non-human would say. He also said to Adrian that the Marine's ability to adapt and survive against all odds was something that reminded him of himself, something a member of a species who had survived the fall of their world would maybe say. Desperate to fight back against the Combine, who had conquered their planet, murdered their young, and created nurseries to imprint the minds of their most important members into new artificial grubs to live as one of them, the Shu'ulathoi story is fascinating, and while I could talk about it forever in this video, I would once again suggest my previous video on it. This is my favourite theory, that the GMan was just another victim of the Combine. Viewed by all as the man with a briefcase, the GMan still remains to be one of gaming's biggest mysteries. This entity and his employers held a considerable amount of power and used it to fulfill their goals across space and time. As for the pawns they lured into their service, their toolsets were auctioned off to the highest bidders. Corporal Adrian Shepard still remains in stasis, stuck in the very moment he was taken by the GMan. Regardless of which theory is correct, the GMan and his employers did appear to be at war, or at least in conflict with the Combine. The Combine were at war with anything that was not their own. I believe the Shu'ulathoi theory to be the most accurate. Even the Vortigaunt knew of them, and they also knew of the GMan, an entity that had mimicked a human almost perfectly, but whose speech pattern and glowing green eyes gave the impression that something was off. Oddly enough, some people say I sound like the GMan. In the GMan and his employers' war against the Combine, who had destroyed their home and species, these hatched Shu'ulathoi may have done the same thing to others, the Nylanth, humanity, and the Vortigaunt, just so they could win. We still have so many questions. Was the GMan against the discovery or use of the Borealis? What was he really? What did he and his employers really want? Was Adrian Shepard ever released? Was the GMan a puppet of his employers, just like Gordon was to him? Was the GMan suitcase his source of power? As of now, as with most of these Half-Life videos, we simply may not know the truth. However, with the retcon of Half-Life 2 Episode 2's ending during Half-Life Alyx, we can remain hopeful that Valve may actually continue this story. As of recording this, we have just had confirmation that the final Team Fortress comic has finished scripting and the artwork is being done. A comic we have waited 7 years for and accepted it would never come out. There could be hope for a continuation of this story after all. I always thought it was very interesting that the GMan did not appear at all in Half-Life 2 Episode 1, aside from when Gordon was freed from stasis. As a child, it took a while to realize that this was because the Vortigaunt had basically protected Gordon from his influence, that he had agreed to abide by certain restrictions, maybe a warning from his employers not to engage with the Vortigaunt. I love the idea that he was furious and just wanted to get back in contact with Freeman so that he could manipulate him into becoming a pawn once again. The GMan has been a highly requested topic, and having dropped my upload schedule lately, I thought it would give me enough time to put this together. I'm pretty sure it came out okay. Personally, as I've said a few times now, I completely buy into the Shu'ulathoi theory. A race of sleeping creatures with the ability to shapeshift actively sought a way to fight back against the Combine who had enslaved their kind. While the GMan may be perceived as an antagonist, because he kind of is, and he sure did cause a lot of death, he could kind of be viewed as good as he is working against the Combine too. Maybe that is too much of a stretch. As I said, the upload schedule has been a bit off lately because I'm trying to make the videos even better and I'm working on bigger videos in the background. One of them is the next timeline. I cannot wait for it all to come together. That was everything I wanted to say. If you enjoyed this deep dive, then I'd love you to subscribe to the channel. Like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you did not, and let me know what you thought in the comments section below. I would also like to thank my gold tier patrons and channel members: Jonas, Lewis, Queen Arby, Fluffy the Dragon, Chicken Guy 791, Ruben Mendoza, Duke, Toadnut, Oren X, Azu, Karatana, AJ, Verona, Comfy, PG Games, Apravis, Arnis, Blaze of Glory, Cole Sherman, Yali Rodriguez, Nabar, 501st Clone Boy, Drakey Phoenix, and Logan Scott. Do you think the GMan is good, bad, or somewhere in the grey area? Which theory do you believe the most, or do you have your own? And what would you like me to cover next? Please let me know in the comments below. This is where our story ends. Check back soon for a new one.